In the heart of Manila, a young transgender Filipino woman called Liwanag navigates a city etched with gender-based violence and discrimination. Multiply marginalized, Liwanag faces a myriad of oppression based on her identity as a young trans woman in Filipino society, with its post-colonial legacies. Although Liwanag's identity is a testament to the resilience of her ancestors, she also carries the weight of a history rewritten by colonizers. Liwanag's ancestral connection is a source of both inspiration and pain. She grew up hearing stories of a distant relative, a revered Babaylan in the pre-colonial Philippines. The Babaylan were spiritual leaders in a matriarchal society where the coexistence of feminine and masculine energies was celebrated. They were healers, orators, keepers of tradition, and deeply respected members of their community. Liwanag's ancestors were respected for their ability to channel the divine feminine, living in a society without the constraints of Western-imposed gender binaries. Whilst embodying this feminine energy, some males also occupied the Babaylan role, existing as priestesses and warriors, and celebrating gods with diverse expressions of gender. One of the most interesting things about this pre-colonial period was the Bisaya language that was spoken. The lack of gendered pronouns, coupled with the status of the Babaylan within pre-colonial society, may suggest that they experienced a lesser form of linguistic, gender-based othering. Unlike the Western construct, which categorizes individuals based on sexual preference, the Babaylan enjoyed the freedom to marry anyone, regardless of gender. Pre-colonial Filipino society was egalitarian in terms of gender, and within this social structure, there was space for gender fluidity and diverse gender identities and expressions. But this was not to last. In 1565, Spanish ships struck the shores of the Philippines and sought to convert the indigenous people to Roman Catholicism. It wasn't long before the Babaylan tradition was systematically destroyed. The colonizers destroyed religious idols, burned sacred places of worship, and subjected the Babaylan to brutal rituals designed to dishonor and disempower. In a horrendous act of cruelty, some of the remaining Babaylans were left by the mouth of rivers, presumably to be devoured by crocodiles. Those who survived were forced into hiding in the mountains to escape relentless persecution. This enforcement of a heteronormative patriarchy altered the fabric of society, and the country has never been the same since. As time passed, the colonizers enforced their narrow beliefs, condemning and even killing those who strayed from their heteronormative standards. The Spaniards imposed their patriarchal values and labeled those who did not conform as heretics and witches. For them, the Babaylan were the living embodiment of Christian sin. It would be easy to mistake this oppression as a masculine destruction of a feminine entity, but this is reductive. To fully understand what happened, it is essential to both acknowledge and overcome the biases of Western positionality. From a Western perspective, the destruction of the Babaylan is just another simplified story of patriarchal colonizers conquering more feminine indigenous people. But this isn't true. This story is different. It was a clash between two cultures. One, where gender was something distinct and rigid and hierarchical, and the other, where gender could have been fluid and kaleidoscopic. This chapter of Filipino history was a massacre not just of a people, but of an ideology. Even when colonial powers withdrew from the Philippines, the country was so fundamentally changed that a return to the matriarchal society of the Babaylan was impossible. The term Babaylan, once synonymous with liberation and fluidity, has now been severed from memory and twisted into a slur word, bayot. And this is not just in the trans community, as generations upon generations of Filipino queer men have inherited the trauma of this name too. Even today, discrimination persists, and Liwanag remains marginalized in their city. The colonial legacy has eroded the acceptance of diverse gender expression, and Liwanag, like much of the LGBTQ+ community in Manila, is called derogatory names and sometimes even physically assaulted. Legal obstacles, societal norms, and violence continue to plague the LGBTQ+ community in the Philippines. The Clerical Error Law of 2001 made it illegal for transgender individuals in the Philippines to change their gender marker on birth certificates, and an ordinance has been passed against cross-dressing, perpetuating outdated norms that restrict personal expression. The Philippines, still grappling with its colonial legacy, does not legally recognize same-sex unions. Today, those failing to conform to the Western-imposed heterosexual gender binary face discrimination, marginalisation, and both physical and structural violence in Filipino society. At least 50 transgender Filipinos were murdered between 2010 and 2020, and sexual violence is another common form of control. Human Rights Watch has found that even school teachers have been known to participate in the bullying of LGBTQ+ students. There are no national laws to protect queer people from hate crimes and discrimination, and this lack of legal protection is also reflected in the police force, with only 8 of the 50 recorded murders of genderqueer Filipinos having ever been investigated. The genocide of Liwanag's ancestors is a story that largely remains untold, and those who have the power to make a change are slow to do so. The violence Liwanag experiences is a complex interplay of historical colonization, gender-based discrimination, and cultural stigmatization. Her experience serves as a microcosm of the broader struggle for identity and acceptance in a society shaped by a colonial legacy that continues to cast its shadows on the diverse expressions of gender and spirituality. We cannot turn back the clock, but the situation is not fully without hope. Today, the Babaylan are icons for queer activists in the Philippines and continue to inspire protests and solidarity among those who are marginalized. For example, the 20-year fight to pass a bill that would see gender identity and sexual orientation-based discrimination punished. To move forward, we must decolonize our thinking and understand how all these different factors intersect to perpetuate violence. In many ways, Philippine society has regressed in terms of acceptance and celebration of queer identity when compared to the pre-colonial era, but it doesn't have to stay this way. Liwanag's journey encapsulates the resilience, struggles, and aspirations of a community torn between its rich ancestral past and the challenges of the present. And perhaps a more accurate understanding of the past can finally equip us with the right words to make a change. Now, Liwanag draws inspiration and strength from the reclamation of the Babaylan cultural heritage through her activism and continued struggle for decolonized queer liberation.